Welcome to the Progtalks by the Progspace. Welcome to the Progtalks, an interview series by the Progspace where we will be talking to musicians in all corners of the progressive music scene. Welcome to the Progtalks. Once again with Uncle Prog, Rune, here today. And today I'm excited because I have with me Dave Kaminsky from Stonehealer, who just released their debut album. How are you doing, Dave?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on.
You're very welcome. And I'm excited because Conquistador, which is Stonehealer's debut album, was released just a few days ago on the 30th of April, right?
Yes.
How has the reception been?
Oh man, it's been amazing so far, to be honest. I've been absolutely shocked by how well it's gone over in reviews and just kind of the feedback we've gotten from especially new listeners, because we're a relatively unknown band. We just put out our very first EP back in 2015, and then it was radio silence for a few years. But we've gotten a ton of streams on Spotify and on Bandcamp, and we've been selling CDs and merch, and it's been far exceeded my expectations.
And I see some reviews have started coming in, and they're overall very positive, right?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's also really awesome for me to see. Like, I see reviewers really getting the intention of the music. And as you know, as the writer of all this stuff, and as a creator, I mean, any creator wants to have their art understood, but this is such emotionally meaningful material to me that I guess it has extra meaning when a writer really takes the time to dive deep and feel along with me and get the music on that level.
Yeah.
So that in addition to the very favorable reviews has been really wonderful.
Yeah, we're going to go a bit more into that because that's one of the favorite or most interesting aspects for me about Conquistador. But to start with, I'm going to ask, that dreaded question for people who don't know Stonehealer. How would you describe your music? Not everyone watching, like you said, you're a up and coming bands, and how would you describe what you're doing with Stonehealer to someone who might not have heard you guys?
Yeah, and there are plenty of people who haven't heard us, but I have been describing this record as a mashup of Alice in Chains and Ulcerate. Like, if you're into like really dissonant and enveloping like technical and avant-garde death black metal, and also like big booty shaking rock and roll, we meet you in the middle.
Well, I love that description. I really do, and I think it touches on a lot of what you're doing. But I think also, personally, I would add that there's a lot of progressive tendencies and elements in there that would appeal to someone who likes progressive death metal or progressive black metal or whatever, in addition to, your, like you say, your more modern, straightforward rock and roll elements and the more like avant-garde black metal elements.
Yeah, and I was thinking about this morning, before coming on, just thinking about the prog element of the music. And for me, like, I've always loved progressive music, whether it's prog rock or prog metal of any kind of subgenre. But what I have here with this album, it's like somehow the middle point of those very polar influences of mine has created a really progressive metal sounding album, even if that wasn't necessarily my intention. That's just kind of like where that middle point ends up being, because I love big fat rock grooves and I love blast beats.
Yeah.
And the combination of them sounds like progressive metal.
Yeah, I find that very interesting because as someone who loves progressive music, but also loves, your black metal, your death metal, your, both technical and more straightforward stuff, I find it interesting how a band like Stonehealer is progressive more in, the sense of the word progressive than in the sense of the genre description, like progressive metal, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, with this, I mean, I made a musical evolution over the last few years to get to this point, and part of that was shedding the pretense of having to make a certain kind of metal record.
Yeah.
And I've said it before, like a lot of elements on this record are gigantic fuck yous to metal elitism and to people who want to categorize art as this is progressive black metal, or this is progressive death metal, or this is for fans of this band and this band and this band. And I don't know, I just wanted to make something that was really authentic to me. And human beings are beautiful, complex creatures, and I am not just one thing, and neither are any of us. So that was my goal, is not to, I didn't want to set out to make a progressive metal record. I was just making me.
Exactly. And as someone who sort of is on the music journalist side of this, I both love and hate those subgenres and categories and all that, because, of course, it's putting music into boxes isn't helpful in many ways, but at the same time, having some kind of tags to help people find things they might enjoy is helpful. So
exactly.
So I think, but for someone who creates music, I think that's less than helpful, right? Like you mentioned, you want to make your art. You don't want to be labeled or boxed in by expectations or whatever.
And that's the beautiful thing, though. It's like, this constant push and pull of the artist is going to try to make music just for themselves and like be true to themselves and keep themselves out of categorical boxes. And the people who write about it and who want to promote this music are going to try to put it into boxes and tag it as certain things. And it's this push and pull that I think is awesome, because you can't have one without the other. Nobody would hear this record if somebody didn't call it progressive metal. So it's like it's awesome, and both things can exist simultaneously.
I think that's right, and I think that's a necessary way of doing it, even if it can put maybe a label that's if not unnecessary, then restricting on something. It can also open up for people to experience new things. If you come into this album with the label progressive metal on your forehead, then I think you might get some positive experiences. You might get some surprises, and you might discover another, aspects of music that you not necessarily do through more traditional progressive metal. But I think it's interesting anyway. So I want to ask a little bit about Conquistador then, because like you mentioned, it's been 6 years since you released that first EP, He Who Rides Immolated Horses. I went back and listened to that, and I really enjoyed that as well. And I believe you recorded most of the album in your own studio. Only the drums were recorded sort of outside of that, right? And
mostly.
So what can you tell me about the process? Did you immediately start after the EP working on this? On how long has it been going? What's your creative process like?
So the EP came out in 2015, but a couple of the songs that appear on Conquistador are, they were written actually, at the same time as I wrote the material for the EP. So like dating back to 2014. And with that EP back then in 2015, it was really just supposed to be a demo. I was really, I'd been in a lot of bands before this, and I hadn't ever kind of taken the reins 100%. I'd always written all the music, but I'd never been performing vocals and bass as well. So with this was, I wanted to start a new band under a new moniker where I was going to be true, really true and authentic to myself and make whatever comes out. Yet I was coming from the world of like black metal, progressive black metal. And I felt I wanted to just kind of dip my toes in the water with trying something more ambitious. And, you know, it was a good thing that I chose to, you know, keep the original demo EP to be, you know, just 4 songs, and not put the what I was thinking of as the gems that I was working on onto that one first.
Yeah.
Because I needed to refine those arrangements. I needed to grow as a musician and songwriter, honestly, as a recording engineer as well. So I've been working on, let's see, the second song on the album, Whence Shall I, and the third song on the album, Surrender, were both written back in 2014. And between 2014 and 2018, which is the year that we actually started recording this album, I'd been working on just arranging and rearranging and writing and rewriting those tunes in addition to the other 5 of them. But it's been a crazy process to get here. Starting in 2018, I YOLO'd all my money into a recording budget because I'm a recording engineer by trade.
Yeah.
But I had to learn that I'm actually good at what I do. That was a huge learning experience for me. I didn't trust myself enough at that time in 2018 to do justice to my music. I didn't believe in myself.
I see. Yeah.
So I made the decision at that point that I was going to entrust somebody else to record the album and mix the album. And that ended up being a mistake at the time because I ended up spending a whole lot of money at a beautiful recording studio and not coming away with what I expected from that experience. And it, you know, it was, I joke it was a $10,000 mistake, but it was also kind of a beautiful life lesson for me and a professional lesson, and allowing me to realize, like, in my job and what I do with artists, working with them one-on-one, recording their music and producing their music, you know, I do things that other people don't do. And you can't expect that same treatment out of every recording experience that you walk into. So, you know, we recorded the drums and guitars and bass and we recorded the whole album over the course of like 3 weeks at this amazing recording studio in Connecticut, which is our home state. And gradually over the next year, from spring 2018 to about spring 2019, I realized, like, I can't use most of this stuff. Like, I need to just, you know, and I was walking it backwards step by step, like damage control, like maybe I can save this, maybe I can save that. I couldn't use a lot of what we came up with, to the point that I ended up just kind of, I re-recorded most of the guitars over the next year. I re-recorded most of the vocals. I had to do major damage control with the drum tracks just to get them to where they are. And you know, it took me 2.5 full years of just constant work, little by little, trial and error, to get the album to the point that it is now, where, you know, I was finally happy with it by the end of 2020.
Yeah.
And that's the only reason why it's come out now, is because I spent all that time and effort just working through these crazy problems and setbacks with the recording itself.
I see. So what you're saying sort of is because the drums that are on the album now, they are then recorded in that studio with a lot of, you know, work from your side to make them usable for you. But other than that, the album was more or less recorded 2 times, first in the studio and then once again by you, right? Yeah,
essentially. I mean, the details are kind of boring, but you know, I would record and re-record things, and, like, for instance, I didn't end up getting DIs on the guitar, the rhythm guitars, and during the original sessions, which is something that I really wanted to make sure I had, so that there was recourse with the guitar tones if I wanted to reamp things later, you know, stuff like that I didn't end up getting like I thought I was going to get, which made it more difficult and made it, you know, so that I had to redo stuff later. But I ended up fully like 100% stoked with how the mixes came out, and the mix and the master, the final master and everything. And it took a really long time, but it was worth doing, because I can finally say for the first time in my career that I'm like completely happy with how a release of mine ended up seeing the world.
Yeah. Well, I guess also it's the album sounds very good. So I think you did a great job there. But in addition to that, that's must be a very important thing for a musician wanting to release what's really their debut, or bringing, because this EP is of course it's a good EP, but like you said, it's almost like a demo. It was more thought of like a to sort of check out what this new project would be, and then this new album is sort of exposing Stonehealer to the world. So I'm guessing having to be able to stand behind that 100%, both with the production, the sound, everything, and in addition to the music, is important to you.
It's liberating. It's truly like freeing, because especially because of how much emotional weight has gone into the material itself. Like it's freeing twofold, because it feels like an emotional and spiritual release to physically put the CD out, to release the album into the world. But it was also, just a long cathartic process to write, and the process of recording and the process of mixing, and getting to that point where I sent it off to my PR guy and said, do whatever you want with it, man. I'm done.
Well, I think, that's, I want to touch a bit on that theme and that, because it's not a concept album, but it has a strong theme, and it seems to be related to, spirituality. It's related to religion, personal growth, I would say. It seems like a lot of, and it seems to be a very personal album. So would you expand a bit on that? The background on Conquistador and the themes that are therein.
Yeah, it is. You hit the nail on the head. It is not a concept album in the traditional sense. It's not telling like a cohesive story, but there are concepts at play that are pervasive through the whole thing. So I discuss in the album statement a concept that I've talked about called mistaken divinity. This idea of someone feeling that they are ordained by God for to do something, right? And this is where the name and the concept, the literal concept of Conquistador comes from.
Yeah.
In that the explorers of the Western world in the 1500s and 1600s during the Age of Discovery felt that they were ordained by God, whether this was coming down from the heads of their state or these individuals themselves felt this way.
The church, or
right. This was kind of the prevailing notion that we have a divine right to expand our empires.
Yeah.
Right. And the connection personally is, and the reason why I went this direction with the album is that same mindset and paradigm is what I personally was terrorized by a terrorizer in my life who was completely convicted that she was God on earth, and was interpreting the divine right and acting through it. And it's such a crazy concept, but the parallels of the brainwash and the mind control and the coercion of people is remarkably similar.
Yeah.
This idea of being ordained by divinity.
Yeah. By a higher power.
Yeah, exactly. It's wild. And, I've never been an overtly religious person. I've always felt spiritually inclined in a very abstract sense. But I was radicalized at a very fragile point in my life at like 19 years old by a zealot, by somebody who was radical herself. And it was kind of the perfect storm in my personal life, where, I am a fiercely loyal individual, and I have always been a very optimistic and hopeful person in general, and when you're a teenager and you're 19 years old and you're full of hate and anger and just abstract hate and anger, that's driven by fear and self-loathing and all these things that I think a lot of people connect with and understand being in that position. Like, this person came into my life like a hurricane and saved me from taking my own life. And what started as a beautiful patient-practitioner relationship, somebody who was helping me heal myself, gradually perverted into taking over my life and turning me against my family and my loved ones. And all under this paradigm that she was speaking as God. So it's very, very powerful. It's a powerful idea. And I think that regardless of anybody's personal experiences, my honesty that I tried to transmit through the music, my hope is that can connect with just about anybody.
Well, the album is very, when you listen to it, it's clear that it's very emotional, and it's clear that it means a lot to you as a musician. The vocals and everything, just, there's a degree of desperation in there, but there's also a feeling of hope, or so for me it's was clear when I listened to the album that this is something that means a lot to you as a person. And starting to read about it, it became quite clear to me that this was an interesting theme, and cathartic as well, some kind of cleansing for you to be able to bring this out and to have this album stand like a declaration from you on this part of your life. And I totally agree with you. I would say that as someone who himself has experiences when I was a teenager with the Norwegian black metal scene and being a part of that, and that negativity and hate and a lot of destructive things that happen there. It's so easy to get caught up that, and you're very vulnerable to be misled into something like that. So and also what you say about how terrifying it is to be faced with someone who is like 100% sure that they're right, and that nothing they do can be questioned, neither by themselves or by others. I find that very, it's an interesting thing. It's a very interesting theme to the album. So then I would like to ask, you talked about the band you had before Stonehealer, Autolatry, right? Yeah.
Autolatry, yes.
Yeah, and I believe I read that some of the tracks on this album, or some of the early stuff, even were like at least like frameworks or ideas that you had even back with that band, which also was with your brother, right? Because I think we need to mention that the other part of Stonehealer is your brother Matt, which is the drummer, like you say, and so I'm wondering then, are you the type of creator who like slowly, painstakingly creates new music, or does it come easy to you? Because those 6 years between the EP and that's quite a long time. How does that working relationship with your brother work also? I'm interested in that.
Well, Matt has been my drummer ever since he was 9 years old and I was like 13. I mean, there's no substitute for brother chemistry. And I think especially with heavy music, because it's so much guitar and drum oriented, guitar being the principal melody instrument and the drums being so important.
Yeah.
We had this immediate, there's this brother chemistry that I feel like is unmistakable. And we've always just had that. And I've never, no music that I've ever personally written like all of and put myself into, like he's been a part of all of that. He's always just been the guy that played drums in all my music. So we work seamlessly. I present him with music. Like we'll work stuff out together, in person, because, I hate demoing out drums, like, programming drums.
Yeah.
When I'm demoing songs. I'll record demos of just guitar and click if we're like not together.
Yeah.
But we'll work stuff out just on the spot, and I'll always write guitar parts and bass parts with the drums in mind. I'll have an idea of the rough idea, of rhythmically what I want to happen,
how you would like it to sound. Yeah.
But he'll just take it from there.
Yeah.
And he's a rhythmic genius and just a drum savant. So that part is easy. The other part of my process with, writing the guitar parts, which come first, and bass and vocal arrangements and lyrics, like that's all. I wouldn't even say it's methodical. It's almost stream of consciousness. When it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
Because I'm a music professional first and foremost. Like I'm a recording engineer first and foremost in my life.
Yeah.
And to that end, like sometimes I'll go 4 months without picking up a guitar because I'm just working on records.
Yeah.
And then so it's like sometimes I'll have something to write about. I'll have something emotionally that needs to get out, whether that's a melody that I'm hearing or whether that's a poem that I take down and I turn that into a verse, and then a verse becomes 2 verses, and then that becomes a song. But I'll write when I need to, is how it's always been. Like I need to get something out of me. And I think it goes along with I'm such a goal-oriented person that if I don't have something I'm working towards, then I'm not gonna deal with it. I got other fish I can fry.
Yeah.
So with I mean, for instance, like with Conquistador, like I wanted to write a bang up follow-up record. I just wanted to make the record I always envisioned making. I had something I needed to do, like that was my goal, and I had to get this very heavy emotional content out of me. So those 2 things, I was in a good place to write these kind of songs, and that's how this came out. But that's really the ingredients for me as a writer.
If you are enjoying this interview, please head over to theprogspace.com for more reviews, articles, pictures and interviews, all about progressive music. You can also find us on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. theprogspace.com. Yeah, I have to say, I find it interesting what you say about you being a professional musician or professional engineer, or, So I'm wondering then, when you are working in the studio with other bands and other bands' music, and, it is... you have to get very much into it, I guess. You have to really, you listen to the same tracks over and over again, and you pick out details and all that stuff that goes into being a good engineer or a good producer. Is it hard then to not come out of that with, your own ideas colored by things you're working on, or to be like... Yeah, I just wondered because, this is your daily work and you are so,
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It is, I think I'm definitely informed by my artists and what I'm working on at the time. But I'd say more than anything, I get inspired to make my own stuff
Yeah.
from work. So like, say I'll be working on like a metalcore record, something that a style that I don't play and haven't ever played personally, but I'll be, working on a section of a song and completely physically and emotionally invested, on guitar tracking with this band one day. But the entire time in the back of my mind, I'm thinking like, oh man, I could play that riff better than this guy. And like, what if he just, what if we actually, instead of doing just this stupid little at the gates riff, like we do, let's counterpoint these guitars, right? Have a second guitar part that's playing something different, or backing it up with chords and moving progressions. And I'll be thinking about how I would do all this.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I'll take inspiration from these people that I'm working with, but it doesn't necessarily specifically color what I work on.
No.
It just, it filters through the way that I see music personally.
Yeah, and it sort of feeds your own creativity in ways, that you're able to do that. Going back to the concept or the theme of the album, I'm quite impressed by the cover. It's quite a striking painting, and it seems to be related to the theme of Conquistador as well. It's a very agonizing, figure there. What can you tell me about the cover and the artist and how that came to be?
So again, it was very important for me from the start that I wanted to commission an original oil painting for the cover. Like that was a goal going in. And I love art. I love oil painting. I love paint in general, but oil is a favorite medium of mine as an art consumer. And I went scouring the world, honestly, for an artist whose aesthetic and whose style matches the feeling that I was presenting with the music. So I found this artist whose name is Leo Ulfelder. And he's a Los Angeles-based painter and visual artist of all kinds, as well as musician. He's an incredible musician as well. And I saw his work on Instagram first, and it immediately just hit me like heavy in the chest. Like I was struck by the emotional weight of his work, and I knew he was the one. I knew he was the guy instantly. So I presented him with the concept for the painting. I had it. This is the vision in my head that I had of the Conquistador represented visually. So I wrote it all out. I gave him a full on description of like, why I'm making this album, what this album is about, the concepts behind it, my emotional weight behind it, my spiritual weight behind it. And once I was able to express that clearly, Leo just took that and he took the image out of my head and he put it on canvas. I went into detail to say, I want to depict the Conquistador, which is it is a metaphorical representation. The Conquistador represents really the ugliness, the most ugly facet of the human ego, and all its trappings. And he can only be felled by the thing that is emerging from his chest, the sunflower.
Yeah, the flower.
Which is there to represent just the broad concept of unconditional love. Because this egotistical arrogance, which is really such a huge root of the concepts outlined in the album, I believe can only be felled by pure unconditional love and allowance and forgiveness of self and others and the good shit.
Exactly. Yeah.
So we, he was able to depict this to the point that, it has a jarring emotional kick to it, this piece of art. And, it brought tears to my eyes the first time I saw it, man. Like, well, it did what I wanted it to do.
It is a very strong piece of cover art, and for someone who's used to picking up music through going in record stores and going through the album covers and finding something that spoke to me, that was some of the first things I reacted to when I saw the promo for the album. I was like, this is interesting. If the music mirrors in some way what the cover of this album is, I'm going to need to listen to this. And I'm very happy that I did. So I wanna move on a little bit, because there seems to be quite a lot of black metal influences and inspirations in your music, and I wanted to ask, where does that come from? What is your personal black metal journey? And to me, I was like, I seem to hear some stuff like Ved Buens Ende and Virus in there. I don't know if that's something that bands that you have listened to.
Yeah, I like those bands. I mean, black metal is probably I listen to a lot of black metal, and it's I no longer consider myself like a black metal guy, but I really enjoy I really enjoy the genre as a whole and a lot of the sub styles, and I think from the time I was like 17, I was working on black metal material in addition to kind of more like death metal oriented material.
Yeah.
But that's kind of been a theme for the last 10 to 15 years of my life, is like finding cool black metal records that are kind of progressive and push the boundaries. I hear the Virus comp a few times, that people hear some of that in there, and it's interesting. Like I don't really listen to that band a whole lot, but I love them.
Yeah.
Do you ever get that from artists? Like they'll really love and appreciate bands and have maybe listened to the records like a few times.
Yeah.
You don't have to be like a super fan all the time to like really love a band. And that's kind of where I fall with a lot of black metal.
Yeah, it's kind of weird, because I would say I even love or highly respect certain bands that I don't really enjoy that much as well. So
yeah,
that happens when it's kind of music where you are like, wow, this is really impressive. It's not my thing, but I have to say I'm really impressed by it. And I'm contractually obligated or like mandated by the Norwegian state, being a Norwegian, to ask then about Norwegian black metal and Scandinavian black metal. What are your experiences with that, if any?
Yeah. I mean, especially being a teenager in the US, like the cool, growing up, everyone's trying to find a way to be different and like edgy in their own way. Yeah. So for me, like I immediately took to the aesthetic of 90s Norwegian black metal. All about it. I dove deep into that rabbit hole. For me, two bands that stand out for me, Helheim is one of my favorite all-time bands, and a bucket list band that I hope one day to see live. They remain an influence on my writing to this day, and I'd say they're my favorite Norwegian band. But another one that comes to mind is Dodheimsgard.
Oh yes, of course, yeah.
Avant-garde, yet also rooted in traditional black metal.
Yeah.
And I think the same can be said for Helheim. I mean, traditional like Viking adjacent black metal, but they have, as they've grown into a band, they've taken on a very progressive notion.
Very much so, yeah.
And they channel a lot of straight rock and roll, and I love that. I love that they can be true to, where they started and where they came from as a band, and continue to find their voice over the years as they age.
Yeah, you're right. It is interesting because a lot of these bands, prime example would be Enslaved, I guess, which, moving very much into a progressive territory and so on with a lot of the other Scandinavian bands, starting out as very, 4x4 black metal, and then moving on to the weirder parts of music in a way.
I remember finding, I must have been, 15, 16 years old. And I remember finding Enslaved in their early material and Frost and Viking Liger Veldi and thinking, whoa, like I love this.
Yeah.
This is awesome. I found my favorite band like instantly. It's an incredible sound.
Yeah.
That was coming out of Norway at that time in the early 90s and mid 90s.
And Enslaved is a very good band like that, and they're also interesting in the fact that they stayed sort of on the side of this whole satanic panic thing and managed to still be a part of the scene. So it's a good band. But then I want to ask about, we touched on black metal now. What about the progressive side of music? Progressive rock, progressive metal, or progressive music in general. What are your experiences with that side of music?
That's interesting. This is something I was thinking about this morning. Like, there's not a whole lot of straight progressive, either metal or just music in general that I listen to. And that's kind of where I feel like as a result of my influences being very polar in metal and rock, I kind of myself find my voice slotting in naturally to what would be called progressive metal. I honestly can't think of a band who I really love and have like off the top of my head that would be considered like straight prog rock or prog metal. I don't really listen to a lot of it.
I see.
But incredibly, like my music ends up coming out in largely something that can be called progressive metal. I don't know. What are some good progressive metal bands?
Well, I have to say that for me, it's interesting because your music seems more to be me like 70s inspired progressive hard rock mixed with black metal or death metal or extreme metal, that what we'd say today, than any form of progressive metal. Which is like people think of, your Queen's Rages and Fate's Warnings and Dream Theaters and those bands, and you can't really think of those bands at all when you listen to Stonehealer. But but maybe you can think of your Camels or your your Yeses or Emerson, Lake and Palmers if they were to play like black metal in 2021.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I honestly never really became a huge like prog head of the originators and the big names. I mean, I hear comps like that a lot, but that was never me in my listening and my fandom. Like, I think one of my favorite bands of all time is Heart.
Oh yeah.
And they're more of they had many progressive leanings, but you wouldn't call them a prog rock band.
No, they're more of a classic hard rock band. Yeah.
And I think that, just, big picture, like I think I like to take the most progressive elements of bands and artists and really latch on to them, even if they're not, you couldn't call them prog rock.
No, exactly.
But there are so many progressive leanings and nuances.
Yeah.
Like Heart inspired me to layer different acoustic instruments with electric instruments. That's my inspiration for really exploring that territory, because what they do with two mandolins playing in counterpoint is fucking amazing.
Yeah, I agree.
I encourage any metalhead to go revisit Heart's discography just for this sick mandolin action, because it's counterpoint, it's prog metal. Yeah. It's like it's real stuff.
No objections there, and I have to say another band that came to mind while I was listening to your album, especially the the more acoustic parts and it's like some of the more straightforward hard rocky parts of Kansas, the band Kansas. Which is also a very American sounding band, and that's also a thing I like about Stonehealer, that it's clearly black metal, but it also has this kind of I wouldn't say Americana, maybe there is something there that I pick up on. But let's move on to this hard rock and also grunge, I want to say, because for me, when I listened to the album, I was like, this is like if Soundgarden decided to make a black metal album, or Alice in Chains, like you mentioned. Where does that come from? Your love of this hard rock and grunge. And
well, that was my entrance into music.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember Nirvana was the first band that I was infatuated with as a kid. I was my dad had a tape of Nevermind, their biggest album.
Yes.
And I must have been, my parents are both musicians and my family is a very musical family. And my brother and I had instruments thrown at us from a young age. So I was playing, cello was my instrument that they gave me. And, I was trying to sound out the songs on Nevermind on the cello because I had no other way to express, like, I can't get these chords and these melodies out of my head. So it started there. And as I grew into my adolescence, I further became kind of obsessed with, like, I want to be a rock star like this. Like, I want to make a lasting impression like this with my music. Cause, Nirvana is cool because they came from punk. Like, that's a punk band that found, like, mainstream rock and mainstream appeal.
Absolutely.
And it's messy and it's raw and it's emotional and it's heavy and it's, I still love Nirvana to this day, but that's kind of what my love for hard rock and the kind of the grunge sound comes from. Then I found bands like Soundgarden and Stone Temple Pilots and Alice in Chains. And, to this day, like, those are my favorite records of all time. Like, Alice in Chains Facelift is number one for me, all time favorite record ever. That'll never change. And then, like, Stone Temple Pilots Core is there, Soundgarden, Bad Motorfinger, like, those are my favorite vocalists, number one. And there's just an unmistakable vibe that, like, matches my personality. So I love it. I can't get rid of it. It's like, it's who I am now.
Well, there's nothing to get rid of because that music genuinely has sort of seeped into the sound of Stonehealer in a very positive way, or should I say in a very melancholic way, because especially when it comes to Alice in Chains, I have to say that there's some kind of desperate melancholy in their music that also comes across in Stonehealer. So that was something I instantly picked up on, that there is a lot of emotion there, and that's something that's personally I think is needed and is interesting in more extreme music as well. So yeah, it's easy to hear. And I want to ask then, since it's just you and your brother, and of course now we're in the middle of a pandemic still, we are seeing some kind of light in the tunnel now. Hopefully it's not another train, but would you guys be interested in performing this music live, or would you I guess you would have to put together some kind of live band then, which is that something that you're considering? Or
I fully plan on doing some serious touring in the future when it is possible to. Matt and I did a lot of touring with Autolatry back in the day.
Yeah.
And we played shows all over the country and had a great time with that. But Matt would not be part of the live lineup that I put together going forward, because that's not where his priority lies.
I see.
So he, we'll take it on a case by case basis for recordings in the future, but he's a farmer. He's agriculturally based. He's an incredible cider maker. If anyone's into cider out there, he's an apple orchard expert and overall agriculture badass. But anybody who knows farming knows that that's your life.
Yes, of course.
Every day.
It is 100% your life. Yeah.
So he will always love music, and he will always be a drummer and always be incredible at drumming. But picking
up your bag and going on tour
that's not going to happen.
That's just impossible. Yeah.
So we'll put together. I will put together a all-star live lineup of musicians who I know and love, and friends of mine who are just incredible, and we'll take the show on the road. That is my goal.
Yeah, and I hope you will get a chance to bring that show over to Europe at one point, because I would love to see this music being performed live. And it's kind of this kind of stupid question, because we're now focusing on Conquistador, but I sort of feel I have to ask it because people are always interested. So are you already writing new material for a follow-up to the album?
Not yet. No. Again, like I am so enjoying this moment right now,
I'm glad.
But on top of that, like I'm building a new recording studio right now that takes up all my days. I'm trying to, keep my fingers fresh with these old these Conquistador songs.
Yeah.
I now that I'm seeing the record do really well and people really connect with the music, I feel I have something to write for again.
Exactly.
I feel that I want to reach back inside me and pull out some more realness, to keep the train moving. So I'm going to be working on this, but not started yet. I don't have a backlog of material. I'm going to let it flow. See what happens.
That's good. Well, thank you so much for being on the Progtalks with me, Dave. And you guys who are watching the show, you should seriously follow the band on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm going to put the links on screen here so you can check them out. You should all, of course, also go and listen to Conquistador, which is available in all like streaming services and on Bandcamp, or even better, buy the goddamn album so that the guys will have some some money to make more music and to get out there. So in my experience, it's going to be worth every penny. So and also thanks for watching and listening. Please like and subscribe. It helps us out a lot at the Progspace. And thank you, Dave, for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Stay safe, everyone, and keep spreading that prog love. The Progtalks, produced by the Progspace. Main host, Rune Belsvik Reinås. Produced by Rune Belsvik Reinås, Vanessa and Matthias Kirsch. All graphics and animations by Vanessa Kirsch. Intro theme by Giuseppe Negri. Outro theme by Zach Munovitz. This was the Progtalks by the Progspace. See you in a week.